All right. So, hi everybody. Um, I believe that we're live now. My name is Austin Thompson. I'm the director of the Youth Engagement Fund. And despite the technical difficulties, we're about to jump into a great conversation for New Economy Week focused on millennial movements and political power. Um, all across the world, we've seen over the last few years young people in the streets demanding justice and systemic change. And most recently, in a number of those countries like Chile, we've seen movements in the streets pivot to movements in the halls of political power and moving their agenda through those chambers as well. So the question we want to have today is really a open conversation for the folks that are involved about what that pivot or the non-pivot looks like from millennial movements in the United States into contesting for political power. And to join us for the discussion, we have Dante from Hoodies, Yong from 350.org, Alexandra Flores-Quilty from United States Student Association, and Varshini Prakash from Divestment Student Network. The first question I'll open up to these folks, and if you are on the live feed watching on YouTube, please feel free to chime in with your questions as well. I'll start off with one. If folks can introduce yourself and answer the question, why political power, why now for millennial movements? And we'll start off with Alexandra from United States Student Association.
Thank you, everyone. I'm excited to be here and talk with you all. As Austin said, I'm with the U.S. Student Association. I'm the elected president. We're a national collective membership organization of 1.5 million students from across the country, and our framework is that of education justice. So we do a lot of things around access to education and fighting for free college, but also it's tied to a lot of other social justice issues. A little bit about myself. I am now based in D.C., but I got my start in organizing and spent most of my life in the state of Oregon, the great state of Oregon. And when I started school at the University of Oregon, my family was really struggling to, one, get me into college and then keep me into college. So really quickly, I was agitated by some student organizers who were fighting against a number of different issues on campus, mainly at the time a giant tuition hike. And I couldn't afford the current cost of college, let alone anything higher. So I got involved pretty quickly organizing. And for me, and I think this is a story of a lot of other people who have now dedicated their lives to the larger movement, is that through organizing, through collective action, was the first time I had ever felt powerful. That these institutions that had dominated my life and the life of my family and my community, for the first time I felt like I actually had tools to influence them. And so I got involved there. By my senior year, I ended up having to drop out of college, which was really devastating both for myself and my family, who had worked so hard to get me through those 4 years of college when I couldn't make my tuition payment and my financial aid was on hold. And so at that point, I then ran for office within USSA, and I'm now working with students across the country to try and change our broken higher education system. I think that this moment is incredibly unique and special, the moment that we're in right now, and I think that we're seeing in a lot of ways a movement of movements, that there's a lot of different issues, a lot of different excitement, and at all of these different movements that you have students and young people at the forefront of them, and they're using innovative ways to be able to confront power. And I think that as far as political power, like at this moment, I think that one of the special things about right now is that across all these movements, we're not just demanding crumbs. We want to change we want to address the root problems. We want to change the entire system. So of course we're putting pressure on presidential candidates that we're confronting all of the largest forms of power right now in the U.S. And so I think it's a special moment in a lot of different ways, and I think one of the things that's really great about it, again, is the fact that young people and students, again, are at the forefront of all these different movements. And we have a very unique framework that's incredibly intersectional that really reflects, I think, the demographics of the different types of people who are at the forefront of these movements.
Thank you, Alexandra. Next, Dante from Million Hoodies. For millennial movements, why political power and why now?
Hi everyone, My name is Dante Barry. I'm the Executive Director for Hoodies Movement for Justice. We're a national racial justice network building next generation leaders around to end mass criminalization and gun violence. And so we've emerged in the wake of the murder of Trayvon Martin. And I think that that is important. It's a pivotal moment, particularly for black folks across this country, that has helped to politicize them to where we are at this moment, where we've seen Trayvon Martin, we've seen Renisha McBride, and we've seen Michael Brown have led us to this moment. And so because of the folks in Ferguson, Missouri, because of the rawness that they provided, the poor black folks who pushed out the most marginalized of the marginalized, they are the reason why we are in this moment right now, why we are in this racialized political moment right now. And I think when we even look at what's happened the last couple of days within Missouri, I think that just puts perspective about how we've gotten to this moment, particularly in Missouri as the epicenter of this. And so I think it's really, really important for black and brown people particularly to build power together. I think it's important for us to also decenter whiteness as it relates to power, and move into this idea of community-based type of power, and a power that values collectivism and that values justice and safety, and that values a investment in communities and a divestment from the institutions that continue to harm us and to kill us and to promote individualism along with corporatism. And so I think it's really, really important for us, for young people in this moment right now, to be building our own power, because we realize that the institutions that were designed never for us in the first place are not working, but it's actually a life and death situation for a lot of us, right? Whether it is police that are coming into our communities, or just immigration enforcement coming into our communities and deporting us and having that barrier to safety, to even Department of Homeland Security and coming in and taking up quote unquote terrorists, right? And this idea of public safety and this idea of national security. Right now, black and brown communities are under attack, and it's very, very important for us to be able to fight back and build our own independent power in order to create safe and just communities for ourselves.
Awesome. Thank you, Dante. Varshini, if you could talk a little bit about this question and respond to other things that have been said about why political power, why now for the movements that are going on right in the country.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Varshini Prakash. I'm the Regional Networks Coordinator for the Divestment Student Network, and we are a national organization of students and youth across the country who are running campaigns on college campuses to get our institutions to stop investing in the fossil fuel industry. And so I came out of a campaign at the University of Massachusetts Amherst and saw firsthand what kind of power students can actually build. So in the question of like why political power, I think when we talk about politics today, the center of gravity sort of rests on the spectacle between Democrats and Republicans, right? Like we're made to feel as though we exist in this binary, that our choices rest between two political parties. And as far as I've seen, oftentimes those choices are both saying slightly different versions of drill, baby, drill. And so what movements have been able to do, what they've always been able to do, and what they're doing now is shifting that center of gravity, shifting the terms of the debate, so we're no longer making decisions based on the lesser of two evils, but actually putting out a bold vision for the world that we want to see. So our movement particularly seeks to create a new consensus around the idea that fossil fuel extraction should not and need not exist, and that we can move candidates and politicians around a vision of clean jobs in renewable energy that are good for the economy and good for people and good for the planet, instead of sort of kowtowing to a centrist version of our vision that ignores what people actually need to survive, which is like basic things like food and water and safety, like Dante's talking about, and access to higher education, and actually investing in our communities and investing in the public rather than bailing out banks. So rather than like molding to this political party binary, we're actually, like, movements have the opportunity to force these parties to mold to us, to a higher standard for what it means to live in the world and a vision for what we want to see. So we think that right now, youth, particularly in this country, are in crisis as a collective. We, as like Dante and Alexandra have talked about, we are facing issues of deportation, of police brutality, of climate crisis, of all of these intersecting and interwoven crises, and in it we have actually a huge opportunity to advocate for and fight for a better world that works for all of us. So I think actually what we need to recognize in this moment is that it is a moment for advocating for something better, and that we need to not be afraid of putting out that vision for the world and for actually leading the way. Yeah, I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. Yong, Jung, same question for you. Why political power? Why now?
Thanks, Austin. Hi, everyone. My name is Yong Cho. I'm the campaign coordinator at 350.org and 350 Action. 350 is an international organization working on campaigns to fight the climate crisis. So I'm originally from Queens, from Sunnyside, New York, from 2 immigrant parents that came to the country from Korea in their late 20s. They spoke very little English and didn't have that much money, and so I was the main translator growing up. And you know, one way that I thought I would take care of my family was by becoming a doctor. But once I learned about fossil fuel extraction, particularly the coal industry and the impact that coal burning has on communities, I knew that I wanted to fight the sources of problems and fight systems. And so I organized because that's one way that I can take care of my parents and people who want to take care of one another. So to the question of, you know, why political power and why now, I think for me it's important to recognize that elections and policies impact real people's lives, particularly those already ignored by politicians in our government. So women, immigrants, people of color, and young people. And it's the candidates' policies, platforms right now, and the promises and the people who are ultimately going to be elected that can either break or continue breaking or support these communities. And so right now, I think we're at a moment where millennial movements are training a whole new generation of leaders, and there's incredible leadership happening in a lot of millennial movements right now. And so taking political power is one way that I see movements taking ourselves seriously. And you know, I'm seeing sort of the outcomes of people-powered movements, right? Like we're seeing it in the movement for Black Lives. We've seen it in the Dreamers, and we saw it in, you know, just last Friday with the rejection of the Keystone XL pipeline, where there was a ton of young people that put in a lot of time that put in a lot of their time and lives into that campaign. And so for me, I think it's about the elections and politics impacting real people, particularly people that have been ignored by our political system, and young people right now taking ourselves seriously because we deserve political power, and we are already making a difference. And you know, to keep our eyes on the prize, like this is all about winning. And politics is a shared space for many movements because we have shared stake in the outcomes of of elections and policies. So in order for us to win together, we need to work together.
Wow, thank you, all of you together. It makes it feel like I'm watching Captain Planet. When all of our powers are combined as different social movements, millennial movements, we can win something huge. You all are giving me so much hope and inspiration, I'm sure, for the people who are watching as well. One question I have is, many of you talked about the role of police or for-profit education companies or fossil fuel industry. They also, similarly to millennial movements, have a critique of government and the way that government functions in our society. So a question I'd like for anyone to take on is, you know, how do millennial movements see the role of government 21st century, and how is that different than the way corporate power, big business, etc. see the role of government? Or is there a difference?
So the Black Youth Project came out with a report not too long ago, and it said that for Black youth, about 54% have had experience with police or has known someone who've had experienced police violence. And I often like to say that this fight is often about this rhetorical question, and it gets deeper into this conversation about power, and it is, who has the right to feel and be safe in this country? And that's a question about inequality, right? There's an unequal balance of power that the government does not provide communities of color with. And I think that in everything else, there is, particularly for young people, particularly for young people of color, there is a need for government, and that I think there has just traditionally been a disinvestment in particularly Black communities and poor communities of color, where there has been little investments in education, little investments in healthcare and housing, and more investments in police, prisons, deportation centers, surveillance, and all of these other things that continue to harm ourselves. And so I think once we move away from this idea that we don't have money, the common narrative that the right often likes to articulate is that we don't have money. I think it's often a question about priorities around values, and that if you are valuing and prioritizing those that are actually most impacted by poverty, by racism, by patriarchy, and all of these systems that are impacting young people, then we're actually will have, one, better use of our funds, but also there will be better relationship between government and those that are young or identify as people of color. And I would also say that I think that what we are seeing is in response to the failing of government on behalf of people of color, is that you're seeing more Black and brown communities take part in political participation because it is a life and death situation. We actually actively need to be engaging in conversations around governance in order for us to be alive and thriving.
You know what's spectacular about what you're saying there, Dante? There's a lot of, maybe there are some business folks who are well-meaning, or even political folks who are saying, how do we get young Black folks involved? And one of the things you're saying is that Black folks aren't involved because they don't trust government. But by redefining the role of government and framing choices on governance about shifting the priorities away from police militarization into human services is one way of rebuilding trust. So I just want to flag that out as a really core principle in what you said. Alexandra, I wonder if you could touch on this a little bit. You've been, the United States Student Association has been talking about the role of higher education in the country. Could you talk just a little bit about, you know, there is a voice out there that says that the reason why student debt is ballooning is because there's too much government in higher education. Could you talk about how do you see the role of government in relationship to this burgeoning movement for free higher education in the United States?
Yeah. So Okay, I'm going to back up for like a second for to kind of like give some context, at least to my perspective and my experience around organizing around student debt and free education. So like back in 2010 to 2012, there was like this really great moment where there was a crisis around student debt, and you saw an outburst of student organizing and student activism that really put that issue at the forefront of a lot of different conversations. And so students at the time were organized, myself included, calling out Sally Mae. We were able to cut the contract between Sally Mae and the Department of Education, and really called into question this economy and this profit-driven economy about corporations making money off of students trying to go to school, and specifically the kind of students that higher education really isn't built for. Poor students, students of color, undocumented students who have to take out incredible amounts of loans and money to get an education. And so there's just this really big moment, and then I think that there was a little bit of a shift in 2013 where we were kind of talking about, or tired of talking about, debating over crumbs, and there's a question that really came forward about why is it that that college costs so much? Why is it that people are making money off of students, not just corporations, but also the federal government, who's the largest profiteer off of student debt? And it really called into question the entire education system of what's the purpose of it and who's it for. And you know, there's been a steady narrative shift since the 80s with Reagan about shifting from viewing education, and I think also a lot of government services, from being a public good and to being a private commodity, and people should buy their education. And so I think that right now that's the narrative that we're fighting, and that's been I think the evolution of the conversation of shifting towards student debt to calling to the very question, what is the purpose of higher education within our society? And right now we're battling it out. Like, we're battling out with the for-profit schools. We're battling it out with the corporate ties to our public universities and community colleges, the bankers that are sitting on our board of regents. We're battling it out with them. We're fighting over this narrative and over these institutions. And you know, higher education, you know, it's just like every other institution in the U.S. It divides class lines. It further divides different marginalized communities, communities of color, poor, undocumented. Every single inequality is magnified through the higher education system. And so that's what the fight is right now. And I think that in a lot of ways similar to within other movements that are absolutely in relation, that we're not just talking about crumbs anymore, we're not just talking about incremental change, but we're demanding an entire reboot of the entire system altogether, and we're not going to settle for anything less.
Thank you for that. You know, one of the things that has come up, I think, so far in this conversation is about power, and how communities begin to build it at both the local level, and then how does this translate into, you know, taking that power into the chambers of government and beyond. Varshini, I wanted to ask you, in order to build the collective strength necessary to get to that scale of influence and power, it seems like there might have to be cross-movement collaboration. And everyone on this panel represents various strains of millennial movements. Varshini, could you talk a little bit about the challenges and opportunities as you see them for cross-movement collaboration in this effort to build independent political power?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see, we'll start with the challenges. So I think one of the first things, when we join movements, there's a part of ourselves that changes, right? There's a moment of politicization. There's a moment of becoming really clear and cognizant of our own agency and our power and our potential. And that, as I've noticed in my own experience, can create like a real deep attachment to a particular identity or a particular movement where we come from. I know I felt that really strongly with climate and with the divestment movement. And I became sort of attached to this brand of what I was a brand that was attached to the moment of my own politicization rather than to this like larger movement. And so we end up thinking and creating strategy oftentimes within the walls of our individual movements, I think, rather than engaging with the sort of discomfort of developing strategy as a larger we. And so a big question for me is, we just had this big action called Our Generation, Our Choice, which was really powerful because a lot of movements came together in the streets. Movements for immigrant rights, movements for Black lives, like movements for climate justice. And it was fascinating observing the crowd, and I felt like I was witnessing like an actual live contestation of power within the action itself, and noticed what challenges people were having as they grappled with like what it meant to create a new political consensus that actually held everyone. And so I think a big challenge for movements right now is how do we actually create cultures in movements that can forge that consensus from the beginning, that makes it a little bit easier to actually go beyond our individual issues and act as a larger collective. And so I think like finding ways to not get wrapped up in identity politics that actually inhibits our movements from building together, but also not ignoring the ramifications of living in a world where white supremacy and patriarchy and capitalism are running rampant, but actually using our understanding of these isms as like a tool to create better strategy, so we're not just like consistently divided. And so I think what actually the opportunity is goes back to what I was talking about before, is that when we come together with a program, like I think actually coming together with a program of what we want and a vision for what we want to see in the world, and bringing these movements together and creating programs for movements of movements is a way that we can actually contest for and win political power.
So the agenda really becomes a bridge for, a shared agenda becomes a bridge for shared collaboration across movement. That's really important. You know, Jung, you've been working the last few months really taking the debate directly to candidates who are running for office in 2016. And one of the questions about political power is, you know, what is the actual purpose of political power in real time? And so looking into 2016, Jung, could you just talk a little bit about how do you functionally achieve, or we as representatives of various movements coming together around a shared agenda, achieve political power in the 2016 election cycle and beyond?
Sure. I can first start off by sharing a little bit about the work that I've been doing in New Hampshire. So with 350 Action, we've been following all the presidential candidates around as they campaign in New Hampshire. Mostly, almost all New Hampshire residents are going around asking presidential candidates about climate. And something that we've seen and that we've known, because it's happened with the Dreamers, it's happened with the movement for Black Lives, right? This is not something that it's just happening in the climate movement. We know that candidates move. We can change the story that they're telling. We can change how they are thinking about writing policies. We can change who they want to be talking to. Like a concrete example of that is with Hillary Clinton, and a few years ago she said that she would be inclined to approve the Keystone XL pipeline. In early January she said she was Secretary of State, so she cannot comment. She said then later, a few months later, she said it was up to the White House. Then she put the White House on notice, and then after being bird-dogged multiple times on this, she said that she opposed the Keystone XL pipeline in Iowa. We've also seen her say that she's not going to accept any campaign contributions from private prison lobbyists. So candidates move, and these are people that we've grown up with, we've seen on television, and are running for the president of the United States. And so one thing that I'm really hopeful for, and was part of the original vision for the Our Generation, Our Choice action that happened on Monday, was that we can come together, movements can come together and try to create our own story and create our vision so that we can shape the story of the vision that we want to see in for 2016 and beyond. And so I'm kind of like driving off of what Varshini had said before, of like creating a shared agenda and having and articulating this shared vision, because I think that's incredibly important in the onset for us and for us to achieve and attain political power.
Awesome, so powerful. You all make me feel like anything is possible in this country, and so it's such a powerful conversation so far. It's only going to get better. We're going to go to some of the questions we've gotten in, and for viewers, if you want to add to this conversation, feel free to do so. A few of the questions on here, I think I can categorize them in this way, and I'll open it up to whoever wants to chime in for our panelists. The question is essentially about when we talk about building independent political power, how much of that is creating new forms of political power and consensus versus independent political power as transforming the existing levers or institutions of power. So creating new spaces and formations of political power, redefining what political power means, versus looking at the existing structures and transforming those, maybe one could say from the outside in or inside out. How do you all see that question in your own work and as you look at building a movement of movements for power? Anyone want to take a stab?
Sorry, Austin, can I ask you to repeat that question?
Yeah, is the project of building political power about creating new, maybe this is a way to say it, new institutions for political power in communities or in the expression of power, or is the project of building political power about transforming the existing institutions in our representative democracy? Whoever asked that question is good, because it stumped, I think it has stumped our panelists here. I'll go to another question from folks. Oh, Varshini, do you want to give it a try?
Sure. So I think it's both. I think it's about, I think this kind of reminds me of the question that you asked earlier, Austin, about governance and what government can do. And I think it's like taking from our own, from my own movement, like the fossil fuel industry's profit motive for us is irreconcilable with having a stable future, right? Like these corporations have amassed incredible amounts of money and power, and they're not making any concrete shifts towards stopping climate change. And so the thing that we've determined that's actually going to make these institutions, that's going to break these institutions and actually allow for the space to imagine and create new worlds, is both strong policy shifts and getting people in office and having people in office on the inside that share our values, that are going to fight for the people, and they're going to not forget the movements that got them into office in the first place. And also combined with external strong movements that can actually take on some of these fights outside and routinely and unapologetically push and hold politicians accountable. And I think something that we're also grappling with right now, and I don't have the answer to this question, is how do we bring together the political project and the economic project? So when we're talking about reinvestment, we're talking about reinvesting money back into our communities. We're talking about building worker cooperatives, about people having agency and ownership over their own means to survival, right? So how do we take that economic project and combine it with actually building power? I don't know. That's a question that I have. Thanks for your question. It's a good one.
Can I just add something? And I think that part of it, I guess, what I struggle with, I think that in a lot of the conversations I hear within different movements, is like a lot of the current institutions, we still have to deal with them. Like they're still, like the police are still there. Like the prison system is still there. ICE is still there. I can try and create like an alternative to like a alternative college that could be really, really cool. That would be like awesome. But as far as getting recognition and trying to get a job and have that accredited, like it's just a different conversation. And so, like, I think, yes, there's absolutely a thirst and like a want and a deep desire for alternative institutions. And I think that a lot of that's already happening, and it happens naturally when confronting the current institutions. But in a lot of ways, in some ways, it's almost a question of privilege of who gets to create alternative ones. And a lot of us who are confronting different institutions, we don't have a choice in it. Like we have to try and confront and change the ones that currently exist. And so I think that that's part of why I guess I was like struggling with how to articulate it, and I probably didn't do a very good job. But a lot of us, like, our fight still rests in these institutions that are dominating our lives, and we're challenging them and potentially creating alternatives along the way. But it doesn't mean that we can't stop challenging the existing ones, because that's like why we're in this fight to begin with.
Powerful. Thank you for that. So just being mindful of time, and I want to give all of the panelists an opportunity to give some closing thoughts about this topic of millennial movements and political power. And obviously, I think everyone here knows each other and are continuing to be in conversation. But I want to just put this out to folks for your closing thoughts, if you could do 2 minutes. Kind of where do we go from here? Given that we know the general direction we're headed, we know about opportunities in 2016 to get to work. Where do we go from here in terms of millennial movements transferring the energy and heat in the streets into contesting for power? And we'll start the opposite. Jung, if you could start off, and then we'll work to other folks from there. Closing comments.
Great, thanks, Austin. I wanted to say one thing about the role of government from the question earlier, and that I think it's I think the bottom line to that is like, who is the government accountable to? And I think that is the biggest difference. I mean, there's lots of differences between corporations and people, but what accountability looks like for profit versus the interests of people shapes the role of government deeply. And I think we need social services. Governments provide spaces for commons, because without that, usually it's all about who has power. Power in terms of like money, power in terms of sex and gender. You know, like all the other systems of inequality will determine who gets what without government providing the laws. And so there are government as an institution to serve the people, and the people and the government being accountable to people is I think the root of it, which is why political power is so necessary, particularly for our movements, because we need governments and formal channels of power to be accountable to people and to us. So thank you all so much.
Powerful. Dante, where do we go from here?
Organize, organize, organize. That's it.
You left no ambiguity there, brother, and agreed with you. Alexandra.
Yeah. So I think that I'm very excited about the next year. I think that a year from now, there's going to be a very different political landscape in the U.S. I think that, again, like we said before, like it's a moment, I think, of a movement of movements, and I think that a lot of them are just taking off, and we haven't seen the height any of them yet. And I think that specifically for the 2016 election, I think that a lot of us aren't approaching it in a lot of the traditional ways, but we're really seeing it, and it's already happening right now, as far as pushing candidates, presidential hopefuls, pushing ballot measure races, pushing congressional candidates, and really, it's not like that they're the end-all, be-all, but really they're a reflection if we're doing good grassroots organizing, that we have a social view of power and that we're trying to do base-building work, and if we're building a large enough base of people who are ready to throw down for our different issues, for our different movements, then the candidates will fall in line, and we've already seen that so far with the presidential election with Hillary and with Bernie Sanders, and I think that's only going to continue to take off. And that right now our task in the next year is to build a strong grassroots movement around our different issues. And I think after the 2016 election, we'll have a new president, a new Congress, new governors, new statewide legislatures, new ballot measures, and those will be indicators of a lot of different of the base building grassroots movements that are happening and are going to continue to take off. And also the results of those things won't actually indicate everything. Afterwards, the response of outrage or of celebration afterwards will also be a part of that as far as the movement that we're doing right now. And so I think that for a lot of us, the way that we're approaching the election and viewing it is very strategic, and is I think, a little bit different than what we've seen within recent presidential elections and presidential election years. So I'm really, really excited, and I think especially I'm honored to be in this space because I think all the people in this conversation are going to be critical players in that.
Powerful stuff. Varshini, what are our next steps? Where do we go from here?
Oh, I'm excited. Yeah, obviously organize, always behind the organizing. I think we need to continue to do that and also not see, as Alexandra was talking about, not see the election as an end in and of itself. I think that's a shift that I want to really incorporate into my own organizing, is how we see that as, yeah, an opportunity to build momentum. And I think something that's inspiring me right now is one of the central messages of Our Generation, Our Choice earlier this week was not looking left, not looking right, but moving forward. And going back to not framing our elections and when we actually disrupt and are a part of these debates, not framing our elections as Democrats versus Republicans and hamstringing the public around a choice that makes them sad, and actually finding meaningful choices around framing our conflict between what it actually is, which is a small group of rich white men and the people. And I think this is a really powerful way to go into the election. And I think obviously continuing to disrupt and inserting ourselves into the national debate, and what that allows us to do is actually set the terms of the debate. And we've already seen the debate changing. We've seen candidates talking about climate change, Black Lives Matter, talking about immigration. But I think we can get in there with a stronger vision for what we actually want to see.
Whoa. You all, I was so on point about the Captain Planet analogy and the Planeteers, because for folks who are listening, I think you should get out your pen and notepad about where do we go from here. What we heard was reclaim the role of government, organize, build a grassroots movement, and set the terms of the debate. I think those right there, for folks who are trying to dig in, how do we build independent political power for millennial movements? You all have laid that out for us. I want to be respectful of time so that New Economy will invite us back again to participate, and say thank you to all of the panelists, Dante, Yong, Jung, Alexandra, and Varshini for participating, and New Economy Week for inviting us. Let's continue the conversation, continue to organize, and continue to win. Thank you all.
Thank you, Austin.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, y'all.
Okay, bye.